The Battle of Keren was fought as part of the East African Campaign during the Second World War. The battle was fought from the 5th of February to the 1st of April 1941 between a mixed Italian army of regular and colonial troops and the attacking British, Commonwealth, and Free French forces. The town of Cheren, located in the Italian colony of Eritrea, was of strategic importance to both the Italian and the British-led forces in 1941. The road and railway routes through Cheren were the key to access the city of Asmara and the Red Sea port of Massawa, both of which surrendered to Allied forces in the aftermath of the battle. Background: originally colonized by the Italians in 1885, Eritrea was used as a staging ground for two Italian invasions of Ethiopia, the First and Second Italo-Abyssinian Wars. The second invasion was launched in 1935, 4 years before the outbreak of World War II in 1939. The Italians conquered Ethiopia in 1936 and incorporated it together with Italian Somaliland and Eritrea to form Italian East Africa, thus expanding the Italian Empire. Following the Italian declaration of war on 10 June 1940, Italian dictator Benito Mussolini ordered his troops to capture the British Somaliland and border towns in the Sudan and Kenya. In response, the British responded by building up a force of more than 2 divisions in Sudan and 3 in Kenya by early February 1941. The Sudan-based forces, commanded by Lieutenant General William Platt and under the overall command of General Archibald Wavell, had launched an attack into Eritrea through Kassala on 18 January and by 1 February had captured Agordat some 100 miles east of Kassala. Late on 30 January, Gazelle Force, 4th Indian Infantry Division Mobile Reconnaissance and Fighting Force commanded by Colonel Frank Messervy, was ordered to make pursuit of the enemy retreating down the road to Cheren. Cheren had no built-in fortifications or defensive structures, but it is surrounded on most sides by a jumble of steep granite mountains and sharp ridges which gave the defending forces on the high ground a distinct advantage whilst providing their artillery with perfect observation of any attacking formations. The narrow Dongolas Gorge at 15 degrees 45 minutes 34 seconds north, 38 degrees 25 minutes 16.8 seconds east, 15.75944 degrees north, 38.421333 degrees east, 15.75944, 38.421333, through which both the road and railway from Agordat to Cheren passed, was dominated on the southeastern side by the massif of Mount Zeben and Mount Failstor, on which stood the imposing defences of Fort Dolagorodok at 15 degrees 45 minutes 14.9 seconds north, 38 degrees 25 minutes 30.6 seconds east, 15.754139 degrees north, 38.425167 degrees east, 15.754139, 38.425167. The other side of the gorge was commanded by the mass of Mount Sanchal with a saddle of secondary summits, Briggs Peak, Hogsback and Flat Top, stretching northwestwards toward Mount Samana. In front of the Sanchal feature on its southwestern side was a secondary ridge, feature 1616, which became known as Cameron Ridge, overlooking the Asidra Valley and the railway line. As the British forces approached Cheren, Gen. Carmino, commander of the 1st Colonial Division, drew in his 5th and 44th Colonial Brigades from positions to the north. 42nd Brigade had reached Cheren from Agordat almost intact, and the 2nd Brigade, which had suffered greater casualties there, was reforming. The 11th Regiment of the Savoie Grenadiers in the Alpini Battalion of the 10th Savoie Grenadiers had just arrived after a 3-day non-stop truck journey from Addis Ababa, while the 11th Colonial Brigade was also in place, having previously been called from reserve in Addis Ababa. Meanwhile, the 6th Brigade, having relinquished its responsibilities at Metemmah, was also making its way to Cheren. Battle. First battle. 5 to 8 February at 800 on the 1st of February 1941. Gazelle Force was held up in crossing the river Baraka some 40 miles from Cheren, where the Pont Mussolini had been blown and the approaches to the river heavily mined. By noon on the 2nd of February, however, they were across the river and winding up the Isidra Valley until brought to a halt at the Dongalas Gorge, some 4 miles from Cheren, where the road had been blocked by the retreating Italians, who had blown the overhanging crags to fill the gorge with boulders and rocks. 4th Indian Division's 11th Indian Infantry Brigade arrived on the 3rd of February, and having made reconnaissance the next day, launched their offensive to the left of the gorge on the 5th of February. The 2nd Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders fought their way to the top of the ridge, feature 1616, in front of Sanchwal, and the next night, the 6th of February, the 14th Punjab Regiment passed through them and advanced onto Briggs Peak, but were counterattacked by elements of the 65 Infantry Division, Savwara Grenadiers, who forced them from their newly taken positions back toward Cameron Ridge, which was being reinforced by 1/6th Rajputana Rifles. The ridge became a focus of fighting for the next 10 days. The ridge was overlooked in front by Sanchal, to the left by Mount Samana, and even from behind by other mountains along the Isidra Valley. The Cameron Highlanders and Rajputana Rifles narrowly hung on to their positions despite being under near constant attack and having to carry all food, water and ammunition up 1,500 feet across the exposed terrain. By the 6th of February, 4th Indian Division's 5th Indian Infantry Brigade had arrived. On the 7th of February, they attacked the Dolagorodok feature east of the gorge, looping right through the Sushalembi Valley and then thrusting from the southeast toward the ridge joining Mount Zelali and Mount Failstore, known as Arquikal. On the night of the 7th of February, a company of the 4/6th Rajputana Rifles, led by Subedar Richpal Ram, took the col and held it until 4:30, when they ran out of ammunition and were driven back to the rest of the battalion on a lower feature. In turn, later on the 8th of February, and having spent most of the day under heavy artillery and mortar fire, they were obliged to withdraw back to their starting positions. Second battle. 10 to 13 February. On the afternoon of the 10th of February, 3/1 of a Stone Punjab regiment attacked Briggs Peak, and by the morning of the 11th of February were on top of Sanchal. However, the requirement for men to handle and carry supplies, ammunition and wounded meant there were only 2 platoons to hold the feature. Having endured heavy shelling and mortar fire throughout the day, they were forced off Sanchal and Briggs Peak with heavy casualties by a determined counter-attack from the Savwara Grenadiers. Once again the attackers were thrown onto desperate defense on Cameron Ridge. Despite the failure by the Punjabis to hold the important observation posts on Sanchal, the renewed attack on Arquikal, planned for the 12th of February, went ahead. 5th Indian Infantry Division's 29th Indian Infantry Brigade was brought up from Baranchu and put under command of 4th Division's Major General Beresford Peace, and held in readiness to exploit the hoped-for breakthrough. At 5:30, supported by an intensive artillery barrage, 4/6th Rajputana Rifles once again led the way. This time, Richpal Ram was less fortunate, and having gained the crest, had a foot blown off and shortly thereafter was mortally wounded. He was awarded a posthumous Victoria Cross for his exploits on the col. Meanwhile, the 411th Sikh Regiment were pushing up around the side of Arquikal, but the overall attack could not be carried through, lacking the extra impact that might have come from the 5th Maratha Light Infantry, which had been diverted to reinforce the hard-pressed defences on Cameron Ridge. Third battle. 15 to 27 March. Platt decided to pause, regroup and train before making a further attempt at Cheren, in order to free up road transport to bring forward the necessary stockpiles for a new attack. 5th Indian Division returned to Kesala, where it could be maintained by the railhead for a period of intensive training until such time as Preparations were complete and the division could be brought forward again for the offensive. Skinner's Horse and most of the motor machine gun companies assembled in front of Aresa and Ardiugra to pose a threat to the Italian line of reinforcement to Cheren. From the north, Briggs Force, consisting of 2 battalions from 4th Indian Division's 7th Indian Infantry Brigade and 2 Free French battalions, had arrived under Brigadier Briggs, the 7th Indian Brigade commander. After crossing the border into Eritrea on the Red Sea coast, Briggs' force had captured Karor and then moved south to take Hubkub. On the 1st of March, the force had broken through the Meselet Pass some 15 miles northeast of Cheren. Briggs' force provided not only a third potential direction of attack to occupy the Cheren defenders but also created a threat to Massawa on the coast, and pinning valuable reserves there. Plan of attack. The scene was set for a set-piece battle with Major General Noel Beresford Pierce's 4th Indian Infantry Division concentrated on the Sanchal side of the gorge and Lewis Heath's 5th Indian Infantry Division, brought forward from Kessala once again, on the Happy Valley side. The Cheren defences had been reinforced with the arrival of 6th Colonial Brigade from Metemma and also the 11th Black Shirt Battalion of the Savoie Grenadiers. The defenders now totaled 25,000 strong, facing an attacking force which had grown to more than 13,000. Beresford Pierce would launch 11th Brigade, expanded to 5 battalions under command, against the peaks of the Sanchal Mass and 5th Brigade against Mount Samana on the left of his front. On the 5th Division front, the Italian reinforcements on Dolagorodok meant Happy Valley was dominated by the defenders and the attackers' artillery had to be withdrawn from their forward positions in the valley to safer locations. Without the artillery, it was no longer considered practical to continue the flanking attack through Okwikol to threaten the Dolagorodok lines of supply. Instead, Major General Lewis Heath determined that Fort Dolagorodok would be the key objective for his Indian 5th Infantry Division. Gaining the fort would not only give the attacking forces the artillery observation post to direct fire on both sides of the gorge but would expose the reverse slopes of the Dolagorodok Mass to direct fire from the fort. The 2 offensives were planned to take place one after the other on the 15th of March so that the full force's artillery could be employed for the preliminary bombardment of them both. At the final meeting on the 14th of March with his commanders, Platt said, "Do not let anybody think this is going to be a walkover. It is not. It is going to be a bloody battle against both enemy and ground. It will be won by the side which lasts longest. I know you will last longer than they do, and I promise you I will last longer than my opposite number." Platt attacks at 700 on the 15th of March. The British and Commonwealth troops of 4th Indian Infantry Division attacked from Cameron Ridge, making for Sanchal, Briggs Peak, Hog's Back and the 3 peaks of Mount Samana. That night, the battle ebbed and flowed with attack and counter-attack, inflicting very heavy casualties on both sides. Meanwhile, on the right, 5th Indian Infantry Division launched its attack on the Dolagorodok feature at 10:30 on the 15th of March. 2nd Highland Light Infantry led the attack on the lower features but made no progress in the daylight because of fire from the overlooking Sanchal Peak, where the Italian defenders had resolutely beaten off the 11th Brigade assault. They were pinned down, taking casualties and without supply until darkness provided the opportunity to withdraw. By moonlight that evening, the attack on Dolagorodok was taken up by 9th Brigade, now commanded by the recently promoted Brigadier Messervy. Heath and Messervy planned a near 2-battalion attack on Pimple and Pinnacle with a 3rd Battalion ready to pass through and strike for the fort. The capture of Pinnacle that night by the 5th Maratha Light Infantry led by Lieutenant Colonel Dennis Reed is described by Compton Mackenzie in Eastern Epic, his official history of the British Indian Army during the war, as one of the outstanding small actions of World War II, decisive in its results and formidable in its achievement. Next morning Meservy scrambled up Pinnacle to congratulate Reid and his Marathas and wondered how they had been able to scramble up with their equipment against fierce opposition, when he was finding it a pretty tough job without either. At the top, when he saw the victors, he was overcome by the splendor of their feat and his combative amber eyes filled with tears. Crucially, this left the defences at the fort weakened, and whilst the counter-attack was taking place, the 2nd West Yorkshire Regiment had made their way over a seemingly impossible knife edge to surprise the fort's defenders, and after a savage fight, the fort was captured by 6:30 with 400 prisoners taken. Finally, Platt had the artillery observation point so greatly needed. Through the 16th of March, the Italians repeatedly counter-attacked whilst 29 Brigade made an unsuccessful attack in the evening to Failstoren-Zeben, which was abandoned after dark on the 17th of March after a day exposed to blistering heat. Fierce fighting in no supply. For the next 10 days, the 5th Indian Division position at Fort Doligarodok, exposed to the enemy on 3 sides, was subject to intense fighting as the Italians threw in more new units in ultimately unsuccessful attempts to regain this key position. Meanwhile, on the Sanchal feature 4th Division, having been given 10th Indian Infantry Brigade under command, continued to batter away to no avail. On the night of the 17th of March, having sustained heavy losses, they withdrew from the slopes of Sanchal and Briggs Peak, and the damaged 10th Brigade returned to 5th Division to reform. 4th Indian Division continued to hold Hogsback and Flat Top. Over the next 3 days, the Italian forces continued to make fierce counterattacks on both sides of the gorge, involving desperate, often hand-to-hand, fighting. Final assault. Platt and his commanders decided that the supreme attack should be made through the Dongalas Gorge. He felt that, because of its physical defensive advantages, the Italians might have neglected their defences. On the nights of 16/17 and 17/18 March, escorted engineers reconnoitred the roadblock and attempted to make a start to clear it. This failed because of interfering fire from the Italian lines. However, the information gathered made clear to Heath that the key to the gorge was not Sanchal but 2 smaller features which overlooked the roadblock on could be approached with much less opposition along the railway line from the tunnel below Cameron Ridge. An attack on the defenders at the head of the gorge was planned to give the sappers and miners the 48 hours they needed free of interference from mortar and machine gun fire required to clear the road. For this Heath would need his full division and had to wait until 10th Brigade had refitted after its mauling on the Sanchal feature. The plan was for 10th Brigade to advance into the gorge whilst 9th Brigade would move down to take 3 smaller hills overlooking the far end of the gorge, and 29th Brigade would then attack to take Mount Zeben and beyond it to the east Mount Canabay, which looked down on Cheren and guarded the road to Asmara. Command of 10th Brigade was taken over by one of Heath's divisional staff officers, Thomas Pete Rees, while his predecessor, Lieutenant Colonel Bernard Fletcher, was released to form Fletcher Force, a mobile force comprising Central India Horse and 6 Matilda II tanks, which would be used to exploit the planned breakthrough in the gorge and move rapidly into the defenders' rear position and attack their reserves. On the 24th of March, diversionary attacks were made on Sanchal, while just before midnight the West Yorkshires and the 3/5 Marathas in Fort Doligarodok moved down to take the lower hills overlooking the gorge. The West Yorkshires were able to take their hill unopposed, but the Marathas met heavy opposition which was well dug in. However, by 7:30 all 3 hills were taken and the gorge's defences on its southeastern side silenced. At 300 on the 25th of March, the 2nd Highland Light Infantry and the 10th Balloch Regiment on their right advanced from the shelter of the railway tunnel, previously cleared by the sappers and miners, up the gorge. A 100-gun artillery bombardment was raining down on the ridge on Sanchal above, and the attack in the gorge achieved complete surprise. with the defenders' attention focused on Sanchal. The 2nd Punjab Regiment then advanced between the Balochis and the West Yorkshires to clear the gorge. By 5:30, the railway bumps and most of the objectives were captured, and the defenders no longer held positions from which to direct fire into the gorge below. The sappers and miners laboured on the road while the battles on the Sanchal and Dolagorodok features continued. By midday on the 26th of March, they had completed remaking the road through the gorge. In the early hours of the 27th of March, the British artillery turned onto Zebun and Falstow. 29th Brigade passed through 9th Brigade's positions to launch their attack at 4:30. But when they made their assault, they found the defenders had withdrawn and were able to occupy Failstore Ridge and the two Zebun summits unopposed. The Italian position was now untenable, and by first light the Royal Air Force was reporting their withdrawal along the road from Cheren to Asmara. The defenders on the central ridge were less fortunate and now effectively cut off. The Savoy Grenadiers and Bessalieri were left with no option but surrender. Fletcher Force was in Cheren by 10:30 and was then sent in pursuit along the Asmara road.